Now that our player is set up, the next thing we are going to do is set up our cameras to frame the action. Back in our level 1 scene, you can see that we already have a camera called main camera. When you create a new scene, Unity will automatically create a camera for you with some default settings. For this project, we have our own camera with settings already made as a prefab for you to use, so let's find that under our prefabs folder, camera, main camera. Let's drag it into our scene and then remove the old main camera. You'll notice that the camera we dragged in got renamed automatically by Unity to main camera 1. While Unity allows you to have game objects with the same name, it does also try and prevent that by adding a number on the end of any newly created object that would share an existing name. In this case, we don't want that one there, so let's rename our new camera to just main camera. Now we can go over everything that is on the main camera and talk about the settings we can adjust. Like any game object, our main camera has a transform that determines its position, rotation, and scale. For a 2D project, the rotation and scale of our camera are mostly inconsequential. The position, however, is important as the negative z-axis is in the direction of out of the screen. This is important because if we have game objects that are further back on the z-axis, then the camera won't see them at all. So, for example, if I take the player and move its z position to -11, you can see in the game view that it can no longer see the player at all. But if I zoomed out in the scene view, you can still see the player here, but it's impossible to really tell for sure where it lies on the z-axis. Which is why for 2D projects, it is generally a good idea to keep all of your game objects at z position 0. So let's change the player position z back to 0 and return to looking at our main camera. There are many settings on the actual camera component, most of which we won't go into detail on, and if you are curious, you can always go to the Unity manual page, which you can do by clicking the question mark icon on any component. But for our 2D game, we only need to talk about a few of these settings. One of those is the projection setting. Because our game is 2D, we want to make sure this is set to orthographic. What this does is it makes the camera display everything without a sense of perspective. So everything looks flat, which works well for our 2D game. We will get into perspective cameras in the 3D projects. Next is the background setting, which is what the camera renders if it doesn't see anything. Because we are making a space game, I think maybe we should change this color to black, so let's do that. That looks like a good default space setting now, without us adding any new sprites. So I think I'd like to keep that change for our future cameras. Since we created this camera from a prefab, we can see up here in the top right of the inspector window the options for the prefab. Since we want to keep this change, we can go to Overrides. Then we can either hit Apply All, or we can review the differences and apply them individually from this dropdown. Since I know we only changed the one thing, I'm going to go ahead and hit Apply All. Now if we look at the prefab in the project folder window, we can see its background has been changed to black. So any new camera we create from this prefab will have a black background. So remember that with prefabs, you can avoid having to make the same change multiple times. You can also modify prefabs directly when you have them selected in the project window. You can see that the inspector shows we have the main camera prefab selected now. And if I change it here, it changes all instances of it in every scene. So if I go to our next important camera setting, which is size, and decide I'd like our camera's viewport to be a little smaller, so it's more focused on the action, I can change it here and it will change it across all instances of the prefab. So let's change that to 5. And if we click back to our main camera in our scene view, you can see that the size has changed from 8 to 5. Now let's say we kinda liked both sizes, and we'd like to be able to easily choose between the two for any level. Well, then we could make another prefab, and the easiest way to do that in this case is to create a new prefab from the existing one. So let's take our main camera in our scene and rename it to Large Camera, which only changes the name. It doesn't actually change the prefab it uses yet. Then let's change the size back to 8. And now we have the game object that uses the main camera prefab, but is different from it, which we can see if we look at the overrides in the inspector. To make this its own prefab, for ease of use, we can drag it into the prefab's camera folder. And because we are making a prefab from an existing prefab, we get this prompt about what kind of prefab we want to create. And for the purposes of this class, we will almost always be selecting original prefab. And now we have two separate camera prefabs for us to use, one large and one small. So let's rename the small one to be more descriptive. So that's everything we need to know about the camera component right now. Let's go back to our large camera and talk about the other components on this game object. The next component is the audio listener, which you can think of as the microphone in the scene that picks up all the audio happening in the game that you hear. By default, any camera game object you create in Unity will come with one of these attached. If we turn it off and hit play, you'll notice that we don't hear anything. And Unity will try to warn us with a message in the console window that we need an audio listener. So let's keep that turned on. Lastly, we have the camera controller component, which is a script we provided for this game, which controls how the camera moves. To get it working, we need to give it a target to follow, which will be our player game object. So let's drag that in. And to get the camera to move with the player, we need to change its camera movement setting from locked to a different option. Let's choose free. And now if we hit play and move the player around, we can see that the camera moves to be between the player and the mouse. Now we have everything we need for a camera set up.